You've been lied to about the patriarchy. For decades, the official story has been that men have held the reins of power since the dawn of time. But this video advances a different thesis, that what we call patriarchy may, in many settings, be a matriarchy wearing a masculine mask. In this reading, men are given the appearance of power, so their egos remain inflated, while the deeper levers, emotional, sexual, social, and symbolic, remain elsewhere. Call that claim an interpretation, not a settled fact. The point is to examine the spell, the stories, incentives, and habits that make hidden power difficult to see. We will move through memory-hold history, goddess cults, fairy tales, literature, and modern psychology. Then we will translate the argument into everyday mechanics: attraction, insecurity, covert power, plausible deniability, projected empathy, structural exchange, continuous ranking, and the collapse of interest when convenience removes the power differential. The historical opening begins with sacred principalities in Anatolia, described in the argument as societies ruled through priestesses of the mother goddess. The claim is that slaves belonged to the goddess herself and could not be bought or sold by men, a picture of authority that does not fit neatly inside a simple male versus female story. The next example is Cybele. When Rome was losing to Carthage, the Romans imported the cult of the Great Mother, the Black Stone, eunuch priests, ecstatic rites, and a ritual system believed to coincide with a sudden turn in military fortune. Whether one reads that as magic, politics, or coincidence, the cultural effect was real. Then comes Attis, the man who defied the Great Mother, went mad, castrated himself, and became her devotee. In the video's symbolic reading, Attis represents the man who enters a feminine sacred domain without the right weapons, truth, hierarchy, self-possession, and is transformed from an independent actor into a servant. The argument next invokes Inanna and Ishtar and a Neo-Babylonian system of sacred prostitution, claiming that every woman had to give herself at least once in the temple before marriage. It describes this as total sexual leveling, a culture in which sexual access became universalized and male exclusivity lost its meaning. Then the lens turns to queens, Mary, Elizabeth, and Victoria, each ruling an empire or political order of enormous scale, while later generations still call the surrounding age patriarchal. The question is not whether men occupied formal offices, it is whether formal office tells us who controlled the emotional, symbolic, and social field. The Bene Gesserit of Dune become a modern literary echo of this pattern, a female order that fears a man who can access masculine blood memory in the way its members access the feminine. Fiction here functions as a mirror, not evidence, a symbolic story about control, inheritance, initiation, and the danger of a power outside the order. Odin supplies another mythic clue. He could be called Urgi, unmanly, for practicing magic, because magic was coded feminine. In this interpretation, the shame does not mean magic is weak. It means the culture polices who may use perception, ritual, narrative, and influence openly. The modern version is quieter but more total. Glamour magic appears in makeup, fashion, scent, posture, and narrative control. Lesser magic that grants a social and sexual influence bonus. Men who use comparable tools, looks maxing, wellness, styling, or deliberate presentation, may be mocked, while men who question the system may be labeled bigots. The Longhouse has expanded into every institution. If a man goes against the Great Mother today, he is not castrated with a knife. He may instead be demasculated through social exile, HR complaints, public shaming, reputation loss, and the slow drip of disapproval that teaches everyone else to stay inside the circle. That is the frame. Everything that follows is the practical day-to-day operating system of what this video calls an open-air witch coven. Not necessarily a conspiracy of women in circles, but an emergent field of incentives, narratives, evolutionary pressures, and genuine differences in cognition and emotion. Folklore is not merely children's entertainment. In this reading, it is a survival manual written in code. The devouring mother, the witch in the forest, the beautiful queen demanding that a mirror confirm her supremacy, and the girl trading her voice or soul for temporary power all carry warnings about enchantment. The prince who is transformed or emasculated for failing a test completes the pattern. These stories were not simply praising strong female characters. They were cautionary maps of female power when it was imagined as unbound by higher masculine values, reciprocal law, or ritual constraint. The sacred principality and the eunuch devotee are the same pattern in story form. A man enters the enchanted domain of the feminine without truth, hierarchy, or self-possession, and ends up transformed, trapped, or serving. The modern world has discarded the warnings while keeping the enchantment. Section 2 calls love a business. The video's definition of love is action, provision, protection, and value-driven charity. Its argument is that the woman does not love in the same way a man loves, but practices pragmatism dressed as romance, advertising, marketing, placing a premium on herself, negotiating and selling. In that model, sexual energy is mana. When it is abundant, it can be exchanged for attention, resources, status, and access. When the mana appears to decline, the long-term partner becomes a vehicle for continued extraction through emotional and psychological means. This is a structural claim about incentives, not a description of every woman. Insecurity in the man is presented as the most reliable tool. His own values, being good, loyal, logical, and fair, can be turned against him. He over-explains, over-gives, and accepts uncertainty because he believes patience will prove his worth. The trap is not kindness itself. It is kindness detached from boundaries and self-respect. Butterflies, the argument says, can be anxiety with a positive valence. Fear and taboo sit at the height of attraction. Power becomes the true language, while emotion is how power is felt. Whether or not one accepts that generalization, it gives the video a working hypothesis. Attraction often responds to tension, uncertainty, and perceived differential. The priestess no longer needs a temple. In the modern version, the temple is Instagram, the dating app, the beauty tutorial, and the cultural narrative that any man who notices the transaction is insecure, toxic, or hateful. Glamour becomes distributed. Appearance, algorithmic attention, and social permission reinforce one another. Section 3 is about shadow values. The claim that higher values such as loyalty, truthfulness, courage, respect, and privacy are practiced more reliably by men, while women are driven more by emotion, comfort, pleasure, and desire. This is a controversial essentialist frame, so the film treats it as an argument to examine, not an established law of nature. The thesis continues. When stated values conflict with emotion, emotion wins. What looks like principle may be performance designed to extract respect, resources, or status. The claim is not that women have no moral capacity. It is that the visible value statement and the actual incentive can diverge, especially under emotional pressure. The script describes respect as unstable across short intervals. Someone can call you a trusted sister one day and condemn you the next. In this framework, that is less a conventional moral failing than an operating system oriented toward safety, status, and emotional regulation rather than abstract principle. Connect that back to the mother goddess cults. The goddess's will is the highest value, and there is no higher law. The modern version replaces the goddess with the individual woman's feelings. A man insisting on objective values becomes the modern Attis, marked for demasculinization because he refuses to surrender the throne of judgment. Section 4 turns to covert power. Men are expected to claim power overtly or not at all, and covert power seeking by a man is labeled cowardice. The argument says women have perfected covert power for millennia, operating through the space between what is said, what is implied, and what others are made to perceive. Indirect communication, subcommunication, smokescreens, and perception management become the tools. Create perception, and you control outcome. The highly skilled operator can claim victory so silently that no one knows a contest occurred. Character becomes secondary to the image of character, and the image becomes the battlefield. The priestesses of Pessinus, in the video's historical analogy, did not need to march armies. Authority could be exercised through the goddess, temple ownership, ritual, and narrative. The modern analogy is the emotional and social field. Whoever defines what happened can often define who is powerful, guilty, or required to apologize. Section 5 examines intention games and plausible deniability. Women, the script argues, operate in the space between bad intent and low self-awareness. When accountability arrives, the past can be rewritten, misunderstanding claimed, or the actor repositioned as victim, witness, or impartial party. Plausible deniability is established before the action. Ambiguous language, selective disclosure, and preemptive innocence create an escape route. The issue is not that every ambiguous act is calculated. It is that ambiguity can function as infrastructure. It allows influence to be exercised while responsibility remains difficult to assign. That is why the earlier image of a Neo-Babylonian cuck imperium feels accurate inside the video's logic. If a whole culture normalizes the same behavior, no individual woman can be challenged without the criticism being reframed as an attack on all women. The intention game is the micro version of the macro glamour. Section 6 asks whether what is called female empathy is sometimes projected sympathy for the self. True cognitive empathy means accurately modeling another mind that is different from your own. The argument says emotional recognition is not the same as perspective taking, and that sympathy can stop where self-recognition stops. The body count debate becomes the example. Many women, the script argues, interpret a man's preference for a lower sexual history as a desire to control or abuse because that is the frame their own psychology would produce. The counterclaim is that some men treat sexual history as information about pair bonding capacity and future risk. Pointing out the pattern is then treated as bigotry because the pattern threatens the glamour. The accusation itself becomes a defensive frame. Attention moves away from whether the observation is accurate and toward whether the observer is morally acceptable. The argument says this is how social power protects itself from inspection. Section 7 describes a structural exchange. Men want sex, women want commitment, and commitment carries more ongoing cost than sex. The woman therefore faces a problem in the video's model, trading something treated as lower market value for something treated as higher value. To close the deal, perceived value is inflated through emotional labor, narrative control, selective truth, and the performance of uniqueness. The resulting inferiority complex is described as a quiet awareness that the exchange is heavily in one direction, producing a continuing need for external confirmation of worth. In this account, lies become structural rather than incidental. The priestess must maintain the illusion that the goddess's gifts are equal to the sacrifices demanded of the male devotees. The metaphor describes what it feels like to live inside a system where the transaction must be believed before it can be sustained. Section 8 says, "Do not hand her the throne. If emotional access is granted too early, the recipient may occupy the position of power and begin withholding sex, affection, or approval as leverage. The person who controls access controls the interaction, and the dynamic becomes hierarchical rather than reciprocal. The man who does not establish a frame early can end up in a totalitarian micro-regime instead of a balanced relationship. Pity sex replaces genuine desire. Withholding becomes policy, reassurance becomes taxation, and the partner learns that compliance is the price of emotional stability. The claim scales outward. The man who refuses to seize the throne in his own house may find the same dynamic waiting in the wider culture. Formal authority exists, but the emotional and social field is controlled through permission, approval, shame, and the threat of exclusion. Section 9 asks how interest is lost. People, the argument says, divide into those already operating from power and those seeking power. The latter view the world through superiority and inferiority rankings. Because every interaction becomes a rank signal, a neutral middle position disappears. The woman's evaluation of a person or event is reduced in this model to whether it produces a feeling of powerfulness or powerlessness. There is no stable middle rank. The ranking mechanism is emotional first. Power is felt before it is explained, and the explanation often arrives afterward. Convenience, high availability, rapid responsiveness, and the absence of cost registers as low rank. Internal confidence generated by overcoming difficulty is less available, so comparative superiority can become the substitute. When a man occupies the convenient position, the ranking mechanism turns against him. Convenience is the contemporary form of the devotee who has already submitted without reciprocal cost. In the Attis pattern and the sacred principalities, The male who enters service without maintaining independent power is absorbed and loses status. The modern version is immediate emotional availability without a retained center. Section 10 argues that high status does not exempt a man from the same mechanism. Wealth, professional achievement, or collective influence can still register as low rank once he becomes predictable, highly available, or primarily valued for provision. When the man shifts into the convenient position, reliable, non-threatening, oriented toward the partner's comfort, the evaluation system reclassifies him. Interest declines because the felt power differential evaporates. Alternative options that restore novelty, tension, or arousal become newly salient. The psychology is continuous ranking by felt power or powerlessness. Abstract commitments, marriage, shared history, and material security are secondary when they conflict with the immediate emotional register. Higher values do not reliably override desire when desire is experienced as urgent, novel, or identity-confirming. Surface narratives maintained through perception management and plausible deniability can present the man as deficient or the relationship as mutually failed, while the underlying driver remains restoration of superior rank or novel arousal. Public language becomes the curtain in front of a private incentive. In extreme cases, the same prioritization of immediate emotional and rank-based gains can cross conventional social boundaries, including discarding a partner or, in rare documented instances, lethal outcomes motivated by desire or the removal of an obstacle. These cases are exceptional and must not be used to generalize about ordinary women or relationships. Observers who attend only to stated feelings may register innocence claims, victim positioning, and rewritten intent while missing the ranking and pragmatism mechanisms underneath. The video's warning is that public language can be sincere, strategic, or both. The surface does not automatically reveal the structure beneath it. This is the scaled application of the core pattern. Formal male authority or resources can coexist with deeper control of emotional and ranking domains. When the differential collapses, the structure reasserts itself through whatever means restore the preferred evaluation, attention, distance, novelty, leverage, or exclusion. The practical mechanics now come into focus: how women test for strength and punish weakness, the difference between performative masculinity and actual frame, and the ways insecurity is weaponized. The useful distinction is not swagger versus softness. It is whether a person can hold values and boundaries under emotional pressure. Direct communication may be experienced as aggression by some women, while indirect communication is treated in the argument as a native tongue. That claim is too broad to be a universal rule, but it points toward a real distinction worth examining. Explicit conflict and influence through implication produce different accountability conditions. Female solidarity is described as a distributed intelligence network protecting the glamour. Friends, group chats, social norms, and reputation systems sharing information about who is safe, desirable, acceptable, or punishable. The same network can provide genuine support, but it can also make a dominant narrative difficult to challenge. The modern continuation operates through appearance, narrative control, and social signaling. These techniques shape outcomes, while people who adopt them openly may face penalty. The dual structure follows. Formal authority may remain male, while deeper control of emotional, sexual, ranking, and narrative domains does not. The ordinary relationship version is continuous ranking. Every person and event is evaluated by the sensation of power or powerlessness. Sexual energy functions as a convertible resource. While abundant, it is exchanged for other forms of value. When it declines, a long-term partner can become a vehicle for continued emotional and psychological extraction. Higher abstract values, loyalty, truthfulness, courage, and consistent respect are practiced more reliably where emotion does not override them. When desire conflicts with stated principle, emotion may prevail. Apparent value statements can therefore function less as guides to conduct than as tools for securing resources or status. Respect itself can prove unstable across short intervals. The same person may be idealized, dismissed, defended, and condemned as the emotional register changes. In the argument, this is why language must be compared with repeated behavior. The stable pattern is not the declaration, but what happens when comfort, status, or desire is threatened. Power is claimed differently according to position. Open assertion is expected from one side and penalized as weakness when it is covert. The other side, the thesis says, operates primarily through indirect communication, perception management, and smokescreens. Control what is perceived, and you influence what occurs. Actions of consequence are often preceded by plausible deniability. Later, events can be rewritten, intent denied, or the actor repositioned as victim or neutral party. The operating space lies between actual intent and claimed absence of awareness, where accountability becomes a negotiation over the story itself. What is labeled empathy may more often function as projected sympathy, limited to situations in which the speaker recognizes herself. Accurate modeling of a genuinely different motivational system is less common. Preferences and behaviors on the other side are then interpreted through the speaker's own frame, rather than understood on their own terms. The exchange of sex for long-term commitment is structurally asymmetric in the video's model. Commitment carries higher ongoing cost, so perceived value is inflated through emotional labor and narrative. Awareness of the imbalance creates a continuing need for external confirmation of worth, making selective truth structural rather than incidental. Early access to emotional intimacy allows the recipient to occupy the position controlling sexual and affectionate resources. Withholding then functions as leverage. The party who grants or withholds permission leads the interaction, and a relationship that appears reciprocal can become hierarchical through the management of access. Convenience remains the central signal. High availability, rapid response, and no cost can register as low rank. External markers of success do not exempt anyone from reevaluation. Wealth and influence are absorbed into the baseline, and the predictable provider can become less arousing precisely because he is reliable. When the rank differential disappears, alternatives that restore novelty or arousal become salient. Surface narratives present the man as deficient or the relationship as mutually failed, while the underlying driver may be the search for a superior emotional register. The pattern is not destiny, it is the video's proposed operating rule. The pattern is continuous across status levels and historical periods, ranking by felt power, sexual energy converted into other resources, covert rather than open power, plausible deniability, projected rather than accurate perspective-taking, structural asymmetry, and loss of interest when convenience removes the differential. The open-air witch coven is not necessarily a conspiracy of women sitting in circles casting spells, though some people do practice occult rituals. It is better understood here as an emergent system. Incentives, evolutionary strategies, cultural narratives, technology, declining religion, and the collapse of male initiation amplifying one another. Fairy tales warned us. History recorded cults and queens. Modern psychology and lived experience supply contemporary observations. None of these records alone proves the whole thesis, but together they create a vocabulary for asking how power hides inside ritual, romance, status, narrative, and everyday emotional exchange. The man who wants to remain free does not need to hate women. He needs to stop believing the glamour. He needs to reclaim the arts of perception, narrative, and self-mastery that Odin was shamed for, that Paul Atreides mastered in fiction, and that the Bene Gesserit feared. He needs higher values that do not bend when emotion demands it. He needs to understand that power claimed covertly is still power, and that refusing to see it is the modern form of self-castration, a metaphor for surrendering judgment, agency, and the right to maintain an independent center. The Longhouse has no walls anymore. It is the air we breathe, a field of incentives, signals, permissions, fears, attractions, and stories that shape behavior before anyone announces a rule. The only way out is not resentment. It is clarity, boundaries, self-possession, and the courage to examine the frame. Read the whole video as a provocative map, not a command to generalize. It asks whether formal authority can conceal deeper control, whether attraction can become a ranking system, whether appearance and narrative can operate as glamour, and whether any relationship survives when higher values are repeatedly sacrificed to immediate emotional power. The practical takeaway is not to hate women, distrust every partner, or turn myth into proof. It is to notice incentives, compare words with repeated behavior, preserve reciprocity, refuse shame as a substitute for evidence, and keep a value system strong enough to survive both desire and fear. If this essay gave you a new lens for history, myth, psychology, and modern power, subscribe for more long-form investigations into consciousness, culture, and the hidden structures shaping human behavior. Thank you for watching Frequency XO Productions, and remember, never give up on yourself.